Hello everyone and welcome to another YouTube video. In the last video we saw how I drew the first game with black after having a completely winning position. So in this video we're gonna see how I did with white. Because as most of you probably know, you play one game with black, you play one game with black, and if it's tie you go to a tiebreak. So I started things off with the move 1 d4. My opponent played d5, c4, c6. So he plays the Slav, which is kind of what I expected. I played knight f3, he played knight f6, and I played knight to c3. Sort of one of the main lines against the Slav. There's a couple things black can do. Black can play e6, which is known as a semi-Slav. Can also play a6, which is known as a Shabanenko Slav. Or he can take the pawn on c4, which is what my opponent did. And this is known as the, accepted Slav, open Slav, whatever. So here I proceeded with the move a4. Usually not a good idea for white to go e4 here, because black goes b. It's a line. This is a completely different line. But black can really try to hang on to this extra pawn here. So I played the move a4, making this move more difficult for black. In case black goes a6, this never really works, because after, let's say, e5, and here black cannot recapture because that hangs a rook. So okay, after a5, my opponent played bishop f5, stopping me from playing e4. And here I decided to, bring a small surprise to the table. Over the last couple of years, I played the move knight e5 exclusively, going after this pawn. So in this game, I played the move e3, the other main line, to just, to surprise him a little bit. So he played e6, I took the pawn, he played bishop e4. This is all pretty standard. I castle, he goes knight bd7, and I go queen e2. The move queen e2, I'm preparing the move e4. My opponent played bishop to g6. I played e4. Now here, black can take the pawn. There's a problem. If black decides to take, I will recapture. And if he takes on e4, I go bishop a3. And I stop him from castling, because the bishop controls the square. And things are not so simple for black. Black has tried, going for queenside castling, but that's also pretty dangerous, because I have this half open b file. Two bishops are pretty strong, so this line's pretty dangerous for black. So it's understandable that my opponent did not go into this, and instead he just castled. After castle, I played bishop d3, and here the main move is bishop h5. But I guess my opponent wanted to take me a bit out of prep, and he played the move a5. Now after the move a5, I played e5, hitting the knight, and my opponent played knight to d5. Now black can also take this bishop here first, but the problem is that after I recapture, now first of all, black cannot take here. I don't take with the pawn because that hangs my queen, but I take with the knight and I'm just up a piece. And in case black goes knight to d5 here, now I go knight g5. I'm hitting this pawn, and it's very difficult for black to defend it. And he cannot put either knight there. If he goes f5, that hangs this, creating a fork. And so black has to go g6, after which I go queen h3, creating this threat once again. So black has to go h5, and here white just goes g4, and he basically gets an attack for free. I haven't sacrificed any material, and black's in very poor shape. My attack is just too strong. So because of that, black played the move knight to d5, and I took on g6, and this is of course a drawback, that here he has to recapture somehow. Right, if he takes the h pawn, this could be pretty dangerous, because now I can make a move like knight to g5. And if I get the queen to the h file, it suddenly could start looking like checkmate. So black's usually a bit reluctant to take with the h pawn in these positions, but instead he took with f pawn. Now a bit more of a solid approach, opening up the rook. The drawback is that this pawn is now of course a bit weak. So I played the move knight to g5, going after the pawn. My opponent played queen e7, and I played queen to g4. Now note that in this position, black cannot really take on c3. Because if he does, I just recapture. And in case he takes, I can take here, and I still have all these ideas. And the problem for black really is that in a line like this, I take, and I have queen a2 at the end, giving a check and picking up the bishop, and I just win the game. And in case black takes with the bishop, I just recapture. In case he takes now I have a move like queen d3, for example, hitting the knight. And in case the knight moves, now I can take here, creating the fork, so white is winning. So because of that, my opponent played queen e7. I played queen to g4, hitting the pawn once again. Once again, black cannot really take, because in case he does, I just recapture, and in case he takes here, I have queen h3 first of all, hitting this, hitting the bishop. And if black goes h6, trying to be clever, hitting my knight, I take here. In case he takes, I have bishop a3, and the problems just don't stop for black. Because I'm hitting the queen, if the queen moves, I hit the rook. So because of that, my opponent just played rook a to e8. I played knight c to e4. Now here once again, I'm trying to bring tactics into position. If black plays knight c to b6, which looks like a very natural move, I was thinking I have knight takes h7. And in case he takes, knight g5, king g8, and queen h4, for example. So I want to go here, create a checkmate, but things are not that simple because black still has to move knight f6. In case I take, he can take with the g-pawn, covering the square. But apparently I have this weird move g4, stopping this, I guess, and here white's just trying to slow roll the attack. Well, let's say rook d1, rook d3, and rook h3. So things are quite tricky for black. So because of that, my opponent got a bit tired of, my knights around here, and he played the move h6. So I played knight f3, and he went queen f7. Now, black should not play a move like g5, because after g5, I play h4. Undermining the pawn. If he takes, I take here, and everything just starts collapsing for black. Sorry, I can take here, and this g5 square is very weak now. So because of that, my opponent played queen to f7. In case he goes king h7, that will be very tricky as well, because here I can start thinking of moves like bishop g5, for example. And in case he takes, I once again have this idea. So he played queen f7, protecting the pawn. And so far I've played a pretty good game, but here I should have, continued in the same energetic manner. I should have played the move knight h4, which is actually a move I considered, and it's not so easy for black. So I'm hitting this pawn, so let's see what black can do. In case black goes g5, I take with the bishop, and he takes, I take. So I hit the queen, and black can go queen f4, offering queen trade, but I go queen h5, going for checkmate here. Now black cannot defend the square somehow. I mean, this square is covered, and this square is covered. So black's only move to try to hang on here, he has two moves. It's knight 7 f6 or the other knight f6, but they lead to the same thing. In case black goes knight f6, I take, black recaptures. And it looks like white's in trouble, because my queen is hanging, and if I move the queen, then black can take, one of the knights, right? That shouldn't do that. But here white has an amazing move. I have to move queen to h8. Black has to take, and now I have check, creating a 4 key, and I pick up the queen. And white's up a pawn with a very good endgame. So it's not that to be honest, I thought that after queen h5 in the game I was winning. I'm pretty sure that I would have. I thought of this line later on, but the reason why I didn't go for this was that I thought that black would play something like king h7, and I didn't think things were that simple. Like, my knight looks slightly off here. Now black can go bishop e7 later on, trying to hit the knight, but here white has a very, very strong move. I have the move rook to a3, which looks insane. But my idea is to, move the rook over, and then I have, attacking ideas again. And the problem for black is in case he takes, now I recapture, and my knight wants to jump into d6, and there's nothing black can do about that. And as soon as the knight lands on d6, the queen will have to move. This starts, falling apart, or I take with the knight, and black's position is starting to collapse. Right? Let's say he goes rook to d8, I hop in with the knight, and queen e7 is not even a move because it traps the queen. Traps the queen. And queen here is also not really, I can just take here and the rook is trapped. So I win my material back. I have a pretty dominant position, so white's just winning here. It was really this line that, bothered me, and I did not consider the move rook a3. I considered ideas like bishop e3, rook b1, rook d3, bishop c1, and then rook h3. But I thought, black is time to go bishop e7. So, yeah, that was kind of unfortunate, but rook a3 is kind of an insane move. And once again, if black doesn't do anything, then let's say he goes here. After rook f3 as well, I'm hitting the queen, and everything is starting to collapse. So that was kind of unfortunate that I did not dig deeper into this line. But okay, rook a3 was a very difficult move to spot. But I played the move bishop to d2. With this move, I'm trying to trade off the bishop so I get access to the d6 square. My opponent played queen f5, offering the queen trade. So I took, he recaptured, I took, he recaptured. Note that black cannot take here. Now I take the rook, takes here, and I drop the bishop back. And black has some sort of compensation with, these knights, but shouldn't be enough. White's up in exchange, and white should win technically. So he recaptured. Now I go knight to d6, but black just goes rook to b8. And my knight on b6 looks very nice, but it also isn't doing a whole lot. So I played rook f to c1, which was already a bit of a weird move. Looking back, I should have played a move like h4, stopping black from ever going g5. And in case black goes rook to d8, just, rook to c1, let's say b6, move the other rook to d1. And it isn't, I don't have, a shocking advantage here, but, still something small to press for, and the game's approximately equal. The rook f1 was already a weird move because I kind of block in this rook. He played rook f to d8, and here I sort of lost the threat. Now I should have played a move like h4 once again, but I thought that black will go b6 and c5, and I didn't really see what to do about that. Right, like let's say go g3, go c5, and black's getting a pretty comfortable position. In case I go, let's say rook d1, I thought that he would, let's say, take and knight c5, and black's knights here are pretty solid. I cannot ever get rid of them. This pawn on a4 is suddenly a bit weak, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, my knights are also pretty active, so the position should be balanced. But the move I played in the game was not a good move. I played knight e1, trying to get rid of this knight. Now it's time to go c5. My knight no longer protects his pawn, so after I took, now he can take here. And the problem is that my queenside majority is very much blocked, and black's kingside majority is still kind of mobile, my pawns are a bit weak. So I played rook to a3, trying to swing the rook in, hitting the knight and the pawn. So my opponent played f4, trying to stop that. I played g3, trying to undermine the pawn. He played b6. So I took, he played knight to g6, and here I played rook f3, which might have been a bit of a weird move. Probably should have gone f5, hitting the knight, but I thought he goes knight f4. But after, let's say, king of 1, white's doing pretty alright. Black would take here, and I played something like knight to c4. I mean, I'm never better here, but the position should be balanced. Right, both sides have a bunch of weak pawns. But my opponent, so I played rook f3, he took, I played knight e4. But he played rook to d4, and after I took here, he took here. So he's threatening a fork here, so play king of 1. But really the main problem here is that my pieces are pretty passive. And once again, this queenside majority is not really a majority. I have a bunch of weaknesses. So I played knight to d5, hitting the pawn. I played b3, and he played e5. So black's trying to push up the board. And here I missed a chance to free my position a little bit. I should have played knight to c2, hitting the rook. Because you goes rook here, I go knight to e4. And black has to go, let's say, rook to d3. He can go rook to e2, but white has knight g3. And know that at this point, a draw would have been a good result already. Because, I mean, my position is clearly worse. So at this point, I was happy to, take a draw and move on to the tiebreaks. In case it goes rook d3, I can just trade and go rook to b1. Not the greatest position, but it's pretty solid. I'm hanging on. But instead I played the move knight to d7, which was quite a mistake. He played rook to e8 and I played rook to c4. But the problem here is that I gave my opponent a chance to go rook to d1. And now I'm in all sorts of pins. So I went rook to e4 and he played rook to e7, which was a mistake. He could have played the move g5. Now the thing is I can take this pawn, right? I can go like knight to e5. But here, first of all, I'm in this pin. Now I'm also in this pin. Like I cannot move anything. In case he goes, let's say king g7, it's almost stalemate. Like what am I gonna do? And in case I take with the rook, now he can go, let's say rook to c8 and go here. And once again, this pin is just so terrible. Like his knights control the entire board. So this would have put me in a very tough spot. But fortunately, he played the move rook e7, which gave me the chance to go knight to b6, at least liquidating the position a little bit. So he took, I took his knight on f4. Here I was actually quite worried that he would, take with the pawn, and in case I take here, play the move knight to d5. But apparently things are not so. I thought that if I go here, he would have knight b4. In case I take, he has. In case he goes knight d3, I go king e2, and I'm winning. I was a bit worried about this, but it might not work out for black. In case he goes f3, now I have rook e3 and take here. So yeah, knight d5. Turns out I have rook a7, and I'm just in time to take the pawn and come back. Knight d3 I have here, and in case of f3 I have rook e5. And he can go here, and he's not worse, but I can just push this up the board, and eventually he will have to take and take here, after which this is just a draw. So I was worried about this, but he actually played a better move. He played knight to d7. Dropped the rook back, and he went knight to f6. So he played rook c4, and he played e4. And even though I liquidated the position a little bit, I'm still under a lot of pressure. So I played rook to e3, he played rook to e5. And this move was quite annoying because it allows him to, swing the rook along the 5th rank and put pressure that way. If I go king g2, which is the move I want to play, he has rook g5, which is awkward to meet, but he also has knight d5, which is even better, hitting the rook. If I take, he takes here, and note that both these rooks protect each other, and black's just up a piece and he's winning. So I played the move h3, stopping any sort of knight jumps. He played rook to b1, and I played f3. Not really a move I wanted to make, because my king gets pretty exposed, but I wanted to liquidate the position a little bit. He played rook f5, pinning. I went king g2, and he took. I recaptured. He played knight to d5. So here he's hitting the rook, and I don't really have a good square for it. I mean, I also have to keep protecting this pawn. So I play rook to e5. The problem here is that he took. Note that I cannot recapture because he's knight e3, winning game. He has a fork. So I have to give a check first. And here he made a very big mistake, one that I didn't really understand. Like, I expected him to go here, right? Because after king f7, which is what he played in the game, I take with check. But in case he goes king h7, I mean, I take, and he takes here, for example. He's up a pawn, and he's also threatening to do this. And I mean, I can go, let's say, rook c5, but after a check, king g1, let's say, and let's say he takes, I go here, knight f4. I mean, I do get it past a pawn. My feeling is that I should not survive this after, just pushing his pawn. I mean, let's say I go here. It really feels like black should be much faster after a5. I mean, it's not that easy, but it feels like there has to be some sort of win. Right, like check here. I don't know, it doesn't feel like I should be able to survive this. So I was quite worried about king h7, but he chose the move king f7. Quite happy to see this. Now I take the rook with a check, king e6. And I said, oh no, my pawn, and I played knight to d3. And here black clearly could have taken the pawn. I don't know why he didn't do that. I mean, I might have given a check or something, and oh, he would have lost the rook. Does work sometimes. So yeah, so here he cannot take the pawn, but material stays equal, and with that, I felt like I should be able to draw the game from now on. He played king to f5, I played rook to e8, and said, oh no, my pawn, once again. In case he takes, I would have given a check and picked up the knight. So he played king f6, played rook to d8, hitting the knight. Knight e7, I gave a check, king g5, play rook b6, protecting the pawn, and he went knight f5. So play rook b5, g6, and knight e5. I don't really want to take here, because then he takes here. My knight is hit. And so I play knight e5, stopping his king from stepping forward, because I can always take. He gave a check. I should not go here, because I lose the rook and the game. I play king f1, he played knight e3, king e1, and played king h4. So I took, he took, I took here, he took here. And I mean, it seems like the game is heading for a draw. Play king e2, play king g3. I could have maybe played a move like, let's say, rook c5, trying to cut off his knight, trying to be sneaky and push this up the board. But I play rook a8, knight c4, play rook to g8, check here, and here. And so I gave a check. He went king to f4. I played rook h8. He went here. I gave a check here. I mean, here I should have just given a check, let's say, and go rook b8, for example. He takes, but this should just be a draw after rook a8. I mean, there's nothing black can really do here. I mean, he's in a pin, and I mean, this pawn isn't enough to win a game. Suddenly, I became a bit worried. Like, I saw with like the last seconds thinking like, oh, he might have, check, but like, this knight is always hanging as well. So I panicked for a second and played rook g6. And so we get to this endgame, which is a draw, but it's still, a bit unpleasant because he can push for like 50 moves and I have to defend. But even though this endgame looks tricky, it's a lot less tricky than rook and bishop versus rook. So what you should do here, so first of all, I pin the knight. So what I'm trying to do, I knew that I could not keep the knight pinned forever, but it takes him some time to unpin, right? Which loses him time to try. So he goes here, I give a check here, 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 and here, king b5. But just give a check, he goes king up, check here. Now, the one thing you should always do in these endgames is you should keep your rook on the other side of your king, right? You should not try to, keep your rook on the, like, let's say on the second rank, because then it's very easy to blunder a knight fork or a skewer. Just keep the rook as far away as possible, pin the knight, make sure the king cannot do anything, and then you should be able to draw this endgame. So play king e2, h3, king d2, king d5, rook d8. What I would also add is, black might make slight progress, but you shouldn't worry too much about that. Just, keep time on the clock, and you should be able to draw this endgame. So play king e5, rook e8, here king e2, and then eventually you'll get closer and closer to that 50 move rule. When king d2, rook h6, king e3, king e5, king d3, king d5, king e3, rook f6. I go here, here, check, here. Now I don't give a check because he's covering that. I just hit the knight here, the king over here, king e3, check, king e2, here, here, h3, king f2. Now I figured as long as I don't ever allow a knight check, I cannot, blunder my rook or something. So when here, king e2, rook a3, 8 here, check here, king e2. So they became slightly annoying, but not annoying enough. Like I just keep pinning the knight. Here, rook e7, king d4. So yeah, he played check here, knight e5. I go king d2, and so even if I get pushed back to the first rank, it's still a draw. But preferably, I didn't want to allow that. So he played rook to h8. I went king c3, check, king c2, king d4. Rook to c7, he played rook h6, rook c8, knight c6, rook g8, king c4, king d2, e6, rook c8, king d4, rook h8, rook e4, rook c8, knight e5. And since we only had like 5 moves to go to the 50 move rule, my opponent offered a draw. So very tough game. I mean, I was playing with white, so I was hoping to push, but eventually I was fighting very hard for a draw from some point onwards. But I do hope that this game, shows you guys how to defend a rook versus rook and knight endgame. I think with a bit of practice, it shouldn't be too difficult. Once again, rook and bishop versus rook, that's a tricky one. But this one, once again, if you keep your rook far away, from on the other side of the king, then just keep hitting the knight, don't blunder your rook, and you should be fine. So yeah, me and my opponent moved on to the tie breaks. Not really what I wanted. I mean, I was hoping to win the games in the classical portion because that would give me a rest day. But I mean, I realized it is what it is, and we'll see in the next video what happened in the tie breaks. So see you guys then. Peace out.